Justice Benjamin, welcome to UNEP. Could you please briefly introduce yourself?
My name is Antonio Benjamin. I am a justice in the High Court of Brazil. I was a public prosecutor, an environmental public prosecutor for 24 years. And I'm also a law professor. I teach comparative environmental law, and at the same time I am a co-chair of the EPC of INIS, the International Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement, and the deputy chair of the IUCN Commission on Environmental Law.
Could you please explain to us about the importance of judiciary or prosecutors in enforcing environmental laws, particularly related to ozone depleting substances?
Environmental laws, at the end of the day, depend on judges and public prosecutors, because otherwise they'll be just goals, policy commitments that may or may not have an impact in practice. It seems to me that because of that, it's impossible to think of environmental law and policy compliance and enforcement without the participation of judges and public prosecutors. But although this seems to be very obvious, for many years public prosecutors and judges have not been considered at the as part of the core of environmental policy nationally and globally. In the first phase, right after 1972, the Stockholm Conference, countries did start enacting legislation, but they were slow in finding out or discovering that they would need judges and public prosecutors, because people would not comply in many instances with those laws that were being passed. Then in the late 80s and especially in the 90s, judges and public prosecutors received more attention, both from UNEP and from environmental institutions in different countries. But still, there is a great number of countries in which judges are completely alienated from environmental issues. And the sad result of that is that laws are not implemented or are not implemented as we would like. So, but at least we have now this clear notion that we have to include judges and public prosecutors in addition to all other actors that have been involved in the environmental policy process: agencies, NGOs, governments, parliamentarians, and so on.
Thank you. And so what could be the obstacles for the judiciary to address environmental enforcement?
The first barrier that I see is scientific knowledge. Some of those environmental law areas are very, very technical, and countries do not have the technical and scientific expertise that will be needed for judges to decide in a proper way a relevant case. Second, it's important that we understand that judges are part of society, and if society is not aware of the seriousness of environmental problems, judges will reflect that, and you end up with weak implementation of laws that might eventually be very clear, be very decisive in the way they approach environmental problems. So even if we draft good laws, we still need to train judges, do capacity building programs, so they can, one, understand the importance of the environmental crisis that we live in, and second, that they get a minimum knowledge of the different and quite often sophisticated areas of environmental law that they might have to deal with.
And what would be your suggestions for capacity building for judiciary?
It seems to me that we need to focus on the whole regulatory circle, from drafting good laws, making sure that parliaments enact legislation that address those issues in a proper way, in a technical way. Second, we need to have people that are in charge of bringing those cases to the courts, giving NGOs, public prosecutors standing to sue in environmental matters. And third, to have a good a judiciary that is well aware of the relevance of those problems and well aware of the laws that exist for dealing with those problems. In this way, you close the regulatory gap, and of course you include the police, customs, environmental agencies. It is an institutional mosaic that has to, although very complex in any country in the world, but it has to work in a synchronized way, because if you lose one of them, the others will not work. Take, for example, the case of customs. If you don't have green customs, those violations will not be identified. So the public prosecutors, the NGOs, and the judges become irrelevant. Or if you do have good green customs, but you don't have trained environmental public prosecutors, they will be missed. And again, this gap will ruin the whole chain of compliance and enforcement. And finally, if you don't have good judges, you might end up with good customs, good public prosecutors, but no convictions and no judicial implementation of those laws.
Justice Benjamin, thank you very much.